So last time we ended up describing some of the problems with trying to measure wins above replacement for pitchers. And it's important to note that the two major systems that try to work on pitching WAR, Fangraphs and Baseball Reference, handle these problems differently. So let's review again some of the differences between Fangraphs and Baseball Reference. There's two basic methods used by Fangraphs or Baseball Reference. Fangraphs uses fielding independent pitching instead of runs allowed per nine. Runs allowed per nine, even though it's better than ERA, still has some measures of defensive ability in the runs allowed metric. Baseball Reference, to take defense out, adjusts runs allowed per nine based on the team defensive skills. So both Fangraphs and Baseball Reference are trying to improve upon just runs allowed per nine, the simple measure of runs allowed by a pitcher, irrespective of earned runs and unearned runs. So they do it different ways. Fangraphs uses FIP, fielding independent pitching, and we've talked about that in our Module 4 pitching sabermetrics track. And Baseball Reference adjusts RA9 based on the defense of the team. So let's look at some of the advantages and disadvantages of RA9, what Baseball Reference does to calculate their pitcher WAR. Now, some of the advantages of RA9 is some pitchers have a skill to beat FIP. Okay, FIP is just measuring home run rates, strikeout rates, and walk rates. There are other components to pitching than just getting strikeouts and not allowing walks and not allowing hard contact. So FIP doesn't measure everything that we would call a pitcher's skill. Baseball Reference does. Baseball Reference doesn't ignore anything at all that happens on the field. Now, Baseball Reference tries to adjust on overall team defense. But that's not always the defense behind the pitcher when they're pitching. It's an average defense for that team as opposed to the defense that's behind them when that pitcher is playing. So RA9 has some advantages over FIP, but the adjustments for defense may not be as good as we'd want them to be. And FIP has some advantages over RA9 in that you're getting at some fundamental skills that the pitcher is demonstrating. Not all the skill set for the pitcher, but an awful lot of the skill set. That's what the advantage of FIP is over measures of RA9 or ERA. What are some of the problems with the Baseball Reference defense adjustment that occurs to RA9? The adjustment is the yearly team defense. It's not the specific defense that's behind a pitcher. And this adds an element of randomness to what you're trying to measure in any given pitcher. What if some pitchers just got lucky and had good luck on defense behind them? That's going to show up in these pitcher WAR metrics, where FIP wouldn't have those showing up at all because they're not really measuring defense. They're looking at strikeouts and walks and home runs. So it's not a perfect defensive adjustment that BR is doing. Now, here's an example. Basically, what happened is, in 2010, the Phillies' defense wasn't that great. But the defense behind Halladay might have been doing well or gotten lucky because his ERA was actually better than his FIP. Now, there's a lot of reasons why his ERA might have been better than his FIP. But one of them could have been a lucky defense or just some random good fortune. So the baseball reference defense adjustment isn't perfect either. And FIP isn't perfect either because it doesn't measure all the pitching skill. So there's advantages and disadvantages to both systems. Now, what is the right answer? The right answer is to sort of look at both. You want to see both what baseball reference is doing to pitcher WAR and what Fangraphs is doing to pitcher WAR. Baseball reference is probably a little bit better over larger samples. So for example, over a large sample, over a career of Tom Glavine, Fangraphs WAR is actually lower than baseball reference WAR. There are probably some skills that Tom Glavine had that didn't show up in his strikeout rate, his walk rate, and his home run rate. His ability to make weak contact, his ability to locate as needed to induce weak contact, his ability to sequence pitches. So Tom Glavine might be the poster boy of representing why FIP doesn't always work. He might have had real batting average on balls in play skills over other pitchers. So this big difference between baseball reference WAR, which might be more true for Tom Glavine's case, and Fangraphs WAR, points out a slight disadvantage to Fangraphs. So baseball reference might be better over a career, but FIP has other advantages over runs allowed per nine, specifically the defense independent statistics that are there. Now Fangraphs reports RA9 WAR, and it's similar to what baseball reference WAR does for pitching, except it doesn't do any defensive adjustment. It just takes RA9. So, bottom line, pitching WAR is difficult. Fangraphs made a choice. Baseball reference made a choice. Neither of them are wrong. It's probably good to sort of just be aware of what both systems do to various pitchers and their skill sets, and understand how they get to their pitching WAR is important. One through RA9 and defensive team adjustments, and one through FIP.